Today we worked on perspective, and perspective is the skill of creating a three-dimensional illusion on a two-dimensional surface. Now, perspective has some elements in it that's a little bit difficult to talk about without actually seeing it on the paper. So we're going to demonstrate a little bit of what we talked about in class, and then I'll explain some of the homework assignments. We're first going to start off with 1-point perspective, and then we're going to move on to 2-point perspective. And you'll see it's pretty clear why it's called 1-point versus 2-point perspective. And so with that, we're just going to go right to the paper, and I'm going to do a voiceover, and you're just going to watch me draw, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the homework assignments for this week. Perspective is a lot of fun. There's some very technical things, so it's almost like we're moving away from the more artistic framework, and now we're moving into a more technical framework. But we'll combine these two skills, and we're looking forward to some great pieces being formed here in just a little bit. So let's start off with 1-point perspective. So for today's assignments and exercises, we're going to start off with using two pieces of equipment. One will be the 2H pencil, and that's going to help us create these fine light lines that we're trying to achieve as we draw with our perspective. And we're going to start this practice with inking, and right now I'm just using a basic Flair pen marker. You can be a ballpoint pen, it can be any kind of marker, but right now I'm just going to use a black Flair. I've also made a straight edge out of just another sheet of paper. And the reason I'm doing this versus getting a ruler is only because I want to be able to have the students be self-sufficient. If they don't have a ruler nearby, then they can just make one by folding a piece of paper several times over, making it nice and thick, nice and firm, and then using that as a straight edge. However, if they do have a ruler, we can just use that. And so we're going to use this, our straight edge, and then we're going to use our 2H's, and we're going to go with our Flair tip marker or just some kind of marker yourself. We're also going to, maybe in a later video, talk about what kind of pens and all that kind of stuff to get. So let's start off with 1-point perspective. With 1-point perspective, there's a couple things that we have to start off with, and that's just knowing a couple of these terms. And the first term we're going to look at is this thing called an eye line, or other instructors will talk about it being a horizon line. And so the horizon line is usually somewhere, it's an imaginary line most often, that cuts across cuts the paper in half, and it kind of marks where the eye level line is, where things begin. Anything above the eye line or horizon line, you begin to see the bottom of objects, and anything below the horizon line or eye line, you begin to see the tops of objects. And that'll be clear in a second. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to start off, and I usually like to put the horizon line somewhere in the middle to somewhere below the middle, the bottom half of the paper. The more the horizon line moves up, the more of the downward view in perspective you'll see. The more the eye line or horizon line goes down the paper, the more of it's going to be what we call a worm's eye view, if you were, as the artist, having a camera and you were forcing the viewer to see from a certain perspective. This would be more from the ground looking up. We would say that like a worm's eye view, and up here would be more from the sky looking down, which would be more like a bird's eye view. And so where you put this horizon line really does matter. And so usually if it makes it, to make people feel comfortable, you usually want to put it somewhere in the middle to this bottom part. Anything below here, you begin to get this idea of I'm like crawling on the ground or I'm flying in the air. And so you use that only for dramatic effect. So let's start off, we're just going to put a horizon line. We're going to draw a light line across the paper. I'm going to see if you can see that line across. So it's a very light line across the paper here. And that's going to be our horizon line. And with 1-point perspective, all that means is that everything that we draw when it comes to drawing with the illusion of depth is going to go to 1 point. And so let's, for example, put this 1 point and just make it very simple. We'll put it right in the middle of the paper. Now what's going to happen is everything we draw is going to go towards that point. And so one of the ways that we do that is the examples we used was basically drawing some kind of road. And so I'm going to draw a road. I'm going to use this road. I'm going to make it pretty thick down here, pretty wide. And then I'm going to draw it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect it, each of those points, to the perspective point. Drawing very lightly. Notice how I made sure that the straight edge connected this point here, and it went to this point over here. Now I just made this an arbitrary. This is just my decision about how wide I wanted the road. It could have been even wider. It could have been even narrower. I chose this just because it's what I want to do. And then every road has a center line, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw real light, just the center line here. And for those road stripes have depth to them, have width to them. So I'm going to draw a line coming through here, and they all go down to this one point. So right now it doesn't look like much. Oh, right now it looks like a triangle with here. So what we want to do is create the illusion of depth. And what we talked about too is that not only can you force the viewer to feel like it's going, that there's depth to the painting or to the picture by forcing these lines to one point, you can also put objects in there that kind of give visual cues about what kind of distance are we talking about. And so we introduced this idea of size. And so if you put an object in the front and it's close to you, it's going to look bigger than it is if it was far away from you. Your brain automatically will perceive that kind of sense of distance. So for example, next to every road, usually in the country, is a fence post. And so we had him draw this fence post here like this, and that's all right there. So this fence post is I want the viewer to feel like this fence post is closer to themselves than back here. So what we have to do is we have to draw some perspective, other fence posts going back into this drawing. And so the way to do that is to take each one of these leading edges here and draw a line, a perspective line, to the corner. And we talked about the fact that perspective lines are always light. The tendency is to want to draw these lines just as dark as you would normally draw a line that belongs on your paper. We're going to erase these perspective lines later on, and if they're drawn drawn heavy with a lot of lead on the paper, it's going to be harder to erase. So the lighter you draw these lines, the easier it is to discern what is a line that you want versus these perspective lines. All right. So now you see how I have this fence post, what's going to be a fence post, starting off here, and then I drew some lines going off into the distance, and we're going to call that the distance. And now, right here, I'm just going to go ahead and arbitrarily put random fence posts. I'm going to choose the number 5 because I want 5 fence posts to go back on this fence. So I'm going to choose one to come here, and I'm going to choose another one to go here, another one to go here, another one to go here, another one to go here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so I got 5. Now notice that these perspective lines also become guidelines on how tall the next corresponding fence post will become, and you'll see how it gets smaller and smaller just by nature. That's because these lines converge onto one point, which again is going to create this illusion of depth. And so this one comes across and just kind of come here and draw this fence post, draw this fence post, draw this fence post, on down. All right, so now you begin to see how this is creating this illusion of depth. Notice how they become the guidelines as well. So the width here is the width here on top, becomes the width, because these posts are identical. All right, so now you have the width and the height of all these posts, naturally because you were careful to put these lines, these perspective lines, converging at this one point, nice and straight, nice and light. So now you'll be able to see how this works. That make sense? So on the other side, we also drew what is on the other side of a lot of roads is a telephone pole. Now, telephone poles are tall. So what we did is we drew this telephone pole and we crossed the horizon line. and then they have a cross piece coming across this way. Okay. Now, just as we did over here, we're going to draw now the perspective lines, very light, converging on this one point. So we're going to start with the bottom. So I'm connecting it. I lay my pencil down on the mark, rest the straight edge up against my pencil, and then move this side to where I want it to be over here, and lightly draw the line. Can you even see that line? I'm not even sure you can even see that line. Very, very light. And just as I drew that, I went from the top of the object, the bottom of the object, and the top of the object converging to this one point. We're going to do the same thing. Now notice, since now it's above this horizon line, it's now going to move down like this. The angle is now going to be going down. Now here's how this will translate. So now we have this bottom line here. Let me make it darker so you guys can see that. All right, so now you have this line going down here, and I want to choose, maybe let's do 4, since this is a lot more. So we have 4, and I am going to draw parallel lines. This is another thing that was kind of hard for the students to do today, because they would want to kind of make it go this way. You want to make them parallel to each other. And the best way to do that, I taught one of the students, you can kind of train your muscles to make these straight lines by guiding this, like you're pretending to draw the edge of the paper. And you're not touching the pencil to the paper, you're just kind of doing this, and you're practicing that straight edge, drawing that straight line. And then even while you're moving, you can come down here and then so there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. Okay, now I'm just going to guesstimate on these cross beams here and here and here. All right, so now we have a fence post, we have telephone poles, and we have this road. Then I had the students, what we did is we inked their pencil drawing. So we take a marker now, and now we're going to choose which lines are going to stay on our paper. And this sometimes gets confusing. Even the best artists will make a mistake in terms of, and they'll end up drawing one of their perspective lines when they didn't mean to. So we're going to do this. So I'm just going to start off with here. And here you can start being creative. So I'm going to make these a little more round, a little more rugged here. Maybe some grass, and a little more round over here, and a little more rugged. See how they're getting smaller? Let's go ahead and put another one back here, and another back here, just to be interesting there. The farther away something gets, the less detail you begin to see. So this, you can have lots of detail on this front one and this one, and they get less detail as they go back. Okay, now telephone pole. This one here, you can make whatever kind of patterns you want, or however much detail you'd like to put in these telephone poles. So little marks there. There's little things that the wires hang off of. See how these those perspective lines also help me decide how tall these are to be. So I'm going all the way down to this perspective line, coming up. Okay, and now I'm going to make a straight edge, and I'm going to draw the road. I'm going to trace over that perspective line here, and perspective line there, and in the center stripe, okay, so I've forgotten about this this thing about the I made the mistake of making each of these stripes equal in size. What I should have done is made them smaller and smaller and smaller as they get off into the distance, and I didn't do that. That's okay. And now you can draw wire coming across. Here's the barbed wire across here. Remember, as it gets farther back, the harder it is to see. You can see those, and then these are those long wires that Alright, so, and then you can draw on this horizon line, you can disguise the horizon line by kind of putting a little mountain range here. And then that's it. And then you take your eraser and you begin to erase some of these lines. Those pencil, very light pencil lines here. And you're erasing those so you don't see them anymore. So that is a very, very basic drawing using 1-point perspective. Just like that.